The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Better Sitefinity User Experiences Through Active Collaboration. Before we get started, I have a couple items I'd like to talk to for housekeeping. Is that please note all lines will be muted. However, we will be taking questions throughout the Sitefinity Partner webinar. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them anytime through the question box to the right of your screen. We'll be collecting them, and we have the speakers on today, of course, and we will answer them live at the end. Also, we will be recording today's session. It's a popular question, so we are recording, and it will be posted to the Progress Partner link within the next couple days. So, in regards to the webinar, my name is Chuck Sicard, Global Partner Marketing Manager here at Progress, and I want to thank you for joining today's partner webinar. This is the fourth in an ongoing monthly series of partner product enablement webinars we're calling Insights into Sitefinity. And today's webinar, again, titled Better Sitefinity User Experience Through Active Collaboration. We all want our Sitefinity projects to be great, both for our teams and for our clients. Between building an innovative user experiences, eliminating bugs, future-proofing code, and putting it all into a package that's easy for clients to maintain, there's a lot of room for error. However, it can be done. Our two presenters from TrueMatter, Dean Schuster, Partner User Experience Strategy, and Becca Rice, User Experience Designer Developer, will share with us that the secret is deep, active collaboration from the moment your project is conceptualized, and they will also tell us how you can achieve this. Topics you'll hear during this webinar include defining those constraints with the entire team early on, manage widgets for better use by your team and your client, economize layouts and widgets for easier build and maintenance, and finally, keep users and clients at the forefront of all decisions. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Dean. Dean.
Great, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar. We are a company called TrueMatter, which means we're a user experience consultancy. And we're also a Progress Sitefinity partner. We've been using Sitefinity for quite a long time and doing user experience for a long time. So what I want to do before we get into the detailed steps that we think you can take to improve user experiences with Sitefinity, I want to unpack the statement that we started with. And because there's some terms in here that everyone uses in one way or the other, but not all of the definitions are commonly held. So let's start with user experience. You've probably heard this word before. It's become something that's really known, especially in the digital realm, but there is not a common understanding of what it is. So I'm going to tell you what user experience is and the way we need to be thinking about it as makers of digital things. So what is it? What is user experience? Simply put, it's every interaction you can have with a thing at its root. That means you can have a user experience with a simple object like a laptop or a glass or utensils. You could have a user experience at the DMV. It's probably not going to be a good one. And of course, you could have an experience from stem to stern with what we call a digital product or something that's created for the screen. And that's basically what we do. And so when we think of UX from our perspective, this is all of us listening in and us at TrueMatter, we're thinking about user experience for the screen. We're thinking about real people all the time. What are they online to do? And we focus completely on that. We're also doing an awful lot of background thought to that specific goal. That means that UX is a lot more than something that's on the surface. It's really not just how something looks, how it performs, how it works, how the words and content work properly. It's all that together. You may have heard people use UX or user experience in a different way. They really mean making something pretty. They mean the GUI, the UI, how it looks. That's not what UX is, and that's not what we're talking about today. UX isn't something that you add when you're done developing, by no means. We often use a metaphor of a vehicle. No one's going to create a high-performance car like a Porsche by engineering it and then making it pretty, right? They do it all together, all at once. And we also believe that UX is for everyone, everyone on the project team, including the client, especially the developers. It's best to think of UX as an iceberg. The user experience, all the thinking that goes into how something works and looks and behaves and operates is the UX. It's the largest part of the iceberg. What we see above the water is what we see on the screen. It's the user interface and how we interact with those great things below it. And that's the best way we can look at it. It's also important to keep that in mind, because everything we're about to tell you about how we approach Sitefinity has to do with creating great user experience. And we think of UX in two ways, externally and internally. Very important to think of this today. External end users are the people who are going to use the things we make, and it needs to be easy, intuitive, all these things you've heard of that make something pleasant, exciting, useful, usable. But we're also thinking of our clients, the people who have to live with this stuff that we make, the people that have to maintain it, the people that have to deal with the decisions we've made, especially within the context of Sitefinity. And we want their experience to be excellent as well, because user experience being excellent in both these cases directly correlates to efficiency, greater profits, savings. And really, in order to make screen experiences that are wonderfully easy to use, also perhaps beautiful and work wonderfully, you have to think about the user from the beginning. And we're going to go through a lot of different types of work that we've done with respect to how we do at Sitefinity, but it all has to come in the end to be something easy to use and also wonderful. So we're making things like this, we're making it with Sitefinity, and everything you see here is utterly devoted to users and their tasks in every way. Okay. The other thing I want to define really quickly before Becca takes over is active collaboration. This is relatively obvious. If you are creating digital products, there's a lot of different skill sets involved, usually a lot of people, and we're expecting, demanding that project teams interact all the time from the very beginning of the project. That will be welcome news to a lot of people, particularly developers, who are often thrown near the end of a cycle when major decisions have already been made. We want everything to come together. This will work great in your agile process. You don't have to be agile to do this. So we simply want people to talk early and often and share their expertise. We're going to talk later about what happens when you don't have all sorts of people on your team. These are disciplines that often are represented when making digital products. A lot of times teams don't have all these people, and that's totally understandable. There's many times when all we really have are developers and maybe the client. That definitely can be a problem for creating great UX, but there are things you can do, and we'll get to those in just a minute. So without further ado, we're going to transition over to Becca, and she's going to use basically the underlying principles I've just discussed to get into some details of how we've learned to use Sitefinity to great effect.
Thank you, Dean. So how do we start? There are a few ground rules that we've established in our team that help us throughout this process. And the first and probably the most important one is to eat, sleep, and breathe Sitefinity. Understand what it does well, where the pain points are, and what ultimately your client will be doing with it, factoring that into every decision you make. So everyone on our team actually has to use the WYSIWYG with the content block widget and understand, you know, how it works and where it might accidentally add that paragraph you don't want, so that they really understand what our client is facing when they maintain a site after we've handed it over. The second one is we make sure to establish clear guidelines with our clients. I think with CMSs, there's this idea that you're going to be able to edit and control every aspect of your site, and that's just not the case, especially with sites that we build. So we establish with our client and with our team the things that they can and can't edit, and this informs our design, it informs IA, our content, and our technical requirements ahead of time. We know that maybe we can do a more complex design somewhere because our client won't be going in and editing that content. We also make it a point to get to know our client user really well, the people or persons that will be maintaining the site. We think of them as part of our team, and we like to understand their strengths and weaknesses and factor that in to their experience while maintaining the site, so that when we hand over the site to them, we know that they'll be successful and they'll be able to maintain the experience that we've designed. So just a little backstory. Our first few Sitefinity sites years ago, we made a lot of mistakes. We kind of jumped in, you know, feet first, and didn't know what we were in for. We had a lot of planning that went into our projects, but I think we weren't planning enough maybe as a team. We kind of stayed siloed in our disciplines throughout the process because that's just what we were used to, but it really wasn't working for us. There was a lot of rework that we'd find at the end of the project, so that put a lot of strain on the developers. And there were just a lot of mishaps, and we weren't communicating well. So we kind of actually did this a few times. After each project, we would meet together and talk about, you know, what went well, what went badly, and try to find those common patterns. And through that, we found a system that works really well for us. So we do wireframes for all our projects, and sometimes prototypes that we eventually test with users. We had done wireframes. This was part of our process before we even started using Sitefinity, but we really honed the way we thought about them after those first few Sitefinity sites. So here's an example of one from an intranet that we've been working on. And you can see it's not real design. You know, we just have blue links, gray boxes. It's kind of proto design though. We use Foundation framework for all of our projects. And so we actually base our wireframes on that grid so that we know you actually can fit 3 columns on this page. You actually can have this content there. We also write in our wireframes. So this is real content that everyone can see ahead of time, including our client. We use Axure for this, but there are a number of tools that do this very well, like Envision, Balsamic. We just are big fans of Axure because it allows us to do prototyping very quickly and test these sites with real users and show them to our clients easily. So what you see here is sometimes hard for people to digest because, like I said, it's not real design, but it is real content and it's the real structure of the site. So this gives the team and the client an overview of what the end product is going to be. For our team, it allows every part to contribute something. So before we really got into this type of thing, when we were just doing wireframes, our information architect would do the wireframes, maybe pass them off to content to say yay or nay, and then kick them over to design for that to start. Design would then go over to our developers. So by that point, the developers hadn't really given any input. They didn't get a say, and oh yeah, you can't do that with Sitefinity. We're gonna have to make, you know, a bunch of custom widgets to achieve this. So by doing this here, adding these notes, which I'm about to show you, we are able to contribute early. When I say we, the developers, we are able to talk to design, talk to content, and help them understand where things are working, where they won't. they factor this into the way they work. So content has to think about, okay, you know, I don't want this title to ever be longer than this because that's going to affect the experience, going to make it harder for the user to digest. So I'm going to want to put a character count on this field. I'm going to want to force it so that they can't make this longer. Or design might say, you know, hey, I really need this to be in this exact layout. I don't want the client to ever be able to change that. So these are things we have to factor in at the very beginning of the project so that when we are building, we have a very clear picture of what things are going to look like and we don't get any surprises. This ultimately becomes kind of the do this before the can't turn back stuff for us, because typically we were running into things at the end of the project that we couldn't change without, you know, blowing up our budget. So here you can see on the right, this is our key that we came up with. As I said earlier, we use Foundation framework, but we also use Feather. And we have a custom Feather build that we've integrated with Foundation 6. And so over here on the right, you'll see we have a list of the widgets that are there out of the box, and then some that we have built that we use throughout multiple projects. We also have a system for showing where we need a custom layout or where we have data-driven elements or content that need a custom widget, and then we give notes for how that might work or why we might need it. So after, you know, IA has given an initial go at the wireframes, these are passed around from team member repeatedly, you know, before we ever sign off on anything or even show it to the client, so that we are all 100% in agreement. This is how things are going to be. This is the actual content, and this is roughly how it will be laid out. It's not final design, but it's as close as we can get to it right now. So here's another example of some custom widgets that we had to build for, this was a menu for the intranet. And on top of having a lot of specific layout requirements, there were also some technical requirements. So it was very easy for us to plan this out using our notations here. We were able to, you know, pass this over to design, make sure they were comfortable with the way this was laid out and that the content strategist felt it'd be easy to understand, and then kick it over to our back-end development team so that they could give their input on what would be coming from third-party databases, what they would need to integrate with the widget to make it function properly. We've gone so far as to start including visual requirement notes on top of front-end dev notes that you'll see here. We always do technical written requirements. This is something we've done for a long time and find it to be very helpful for us internally, but also when we work with third-party partners. So this actually came about because we were working with a number of external partners, and we realized that it wasn't enough to just hand someone a Word document, expect them to read it all for one, or to really understand things just seeing it written on paper. So this gives us a way to show them visually what we're talking about, give them a reference. So it's not only here's how it should work, but here's roughly how it should look when it's finished, so that they're able to do all of this successfully without having to ask a million questions. We try to answer their questions ahead of time, basically. So this is with both notes, and we do all of this in the wireframes. You can toggle them on and off. This has been a really great tool for us, and we're very happy with the changes we've seen in our overall process as a result. So just to recap on that, everyone gets to contribute at the very beginning of the project. And I know that that's very typical. You might have a project kickoff where everyone gets to learn about the project. But with our method, everyone is actively engaged and contributing their input and their specific concerns very early on. Our designer gets to do the layout and gets kind of a proto design before they ever really have to think about colors, typefaces, things that often can get in the way of really thinking about the experience of the user. So our content can then be written in context, which is really, really crucial for writing good web content. And it's able to inform the design, because when our designer takes these wireframes and goes into InDesign or Photoshop, whatever they're using, they know exactly how long a heading will be, exactly how many paragraphs will be on a page, and this can inform their design. This also allows us to establish requirements ahead of time so we don't have any surprises later down the road, and identify common elements and patterns that we see among different pages as we're wireframing them, and can kind of list those out as these are the things that need to be built out. So we have a clear picture of what our timeline is ultimately going to be. And of course, all the developers get to see things at the very beginning. They know what's coming for them at the end, and there's no surprises. For our end user, they ultimately get a great experience, which is what we want. They get an easy-to-use, task-focused interface. And for our client user, we know that when we hand over our site to them, it's not going to be a huge headache. They're not going to dread updating content on their site, and they'll be happy with it so that they can achieve their internal goals, business goals, and come back to us when they need adjustments. So one of the things that we realized while doing this wireframing technique was that no matter how much thought we put into things ahead of time, we were still going to be faced with clients that didn't have the technical skills we do, that don't know HTML, that can't be relied on to remember 1,000 different steps to execute, a bulleted list or something that we see as very simple. So we just have accepted that, and now we factor that into our process. So we designed for the WYSIWYG, and I know that sounds kind of crazy because no one enjoys using a WYSIWYG, especially developers, and we know that WYSIWYGs and clients don't work well. Even the best ones, and Sitefinity's isn't bad, with using Kendo, can be great, but there's always going to be user error involved. So there's always going to be an extra space somewhere you don't want, things like that. So we wanted to at least make it as easy for our client user to use the WYSIWYG as possible. We actually came to this after a number of sites where we'd go back after months after launch and look over pages and see, oh man, that is not what it looked like when we launched. That does not match the design. What's happening here? Or we'd have a client email us and say, hey, I went to edit this text here and now I've broken my site. Usually it was something simple, a misplaced heading, but it happened a lot. And so we tried workarounds where we come out with multiple widgets that would force styling. There's an example here. This is for the intranet I mentioned earlier. And we have a number of link lists, like you see here, where we wanted to use icons so it would be very easy for the user to scan over the page and find what they needed and know exactly what it was going to do. So we had a number of documents, external links, internal links, all in the same list, and this is frequently used throughout the site. We knew that multiple people would be maintaining this, not just a marketing team with a developer. So we had to factor that in, and this very quickly became a, oh crap, how do we make all these link lists look the way we want, which we know is crucial to the end experience, without making our client user remember all of these rules, like add a class here, use this widget, that widget. So our first thought, and this came out of the wireframing stage, was, okay, let's build 3 widgets. We'll have one for external documents, we'll have one for internal documents, and we'll have one for lists of links. And this will allow them to just drag it on the page, enter their URLs, and it'll all display exactly the way we intended. We tried that for like 5 seconds, maybe, and the IA and content strategist kicked it over to front end and said, you know what, when we were planning this out, this is actually going to be more work for you guys and probably more work for our client, because they now have to remember when to use which widget and not to use the WYSIWYG, which is what they're so used to. So front end came up with a styling solution for this, where we're sniffing out the types of links and applying an icon to them based on that. So from our client's perspective, all they have to do is update their list of links, and they will display correctly. So through talking to each other and working collaboratively, we were able to simplify things for our client so that they don't have to think about it. This means our end user can still find that document they need in a sea of documents, and that our client can update them without thinking about it. So that was an example of where we use styling to solve something. That's not always an option. And sometimes we'll create widgets, custom widgets, to handle maintenance issues where we have maybe complex data or design that we want to maintain, and we can't come up with a simple styling solution. So one of the ones that was we didn't have out of the box with Feather was a button widget. Buttons are very simple, very easy to use, but they do require a little technical knowledge. You know, for us, we often use links with a class on them to make them look like a button, and we can't rely on our client to remember to add that class or to not accidentally remove it. So here's an example where we have a button and a call out. This is really easy for us because you know, early on we try to predict everywhere they might need a button and for styling based on that. So we'd create page layouts where if you added a link to this box, no matter what, it would display as a button. And that handled, you know, the issue for us for a while, but then we ran into issues where a client would want a button on a new page they were building that we had never seen and didn't know, you know, what layout or what page template they'd be using, like here. So these buttons are crucial, especially on this page, for these interactions like paying your bill and going to see your health chart online. And we know the impacts they have on usability. We've seen it in tests. So we wanted them to be able to use them, but we can't predict every case they're going to have. So the way we solved this was just by building a simple button widget. We had IA architect the widget designer in a wireframe so that we knew all of the requirements up front. We had content give input on, you know, character limits if she didn't want the button to, you know, be super long, hard to read. Same with design. No designer wants to see the button text wrap, you know, unless that's how it was designed. That's not going to be your favorite. So we think about this in the wireframing stage, and this went around the team. You know, we all gave our input, even adding a drop down for icons as an option. Some of our projects, we do have buttons with icons in them. And this resulted in just a very simple widget that we now use in all our projects. And our client can drag this on the page, put in their external link or link to an internal page, and be done. And they can have their button wherever, regardless of the layout. Another example, this is a children's museum. And we had a client that wasn't very tech savvy, and they needed to be able to edit and add new exhibits frequently. We're talking like day-to-day editing the content of these exhibits. And we knew that this information would be presented on several different pages and designed different on those pages. So we had to account for that ahead of time. Again, we went to let's use a widget for this. How can we make this as easy for them to update as possible? And it slowly became several widgets that would have to be used on multiple pages, and again, a lot for our client to remember. And so we simplified this by using a dynamic content module. And this was actually a huge game changer for us because until that point, we hadn't really been utilizing that part of Sitefinity, and it's really awesome. One of the benefits is that Sitefinity actually caches dynamic module content. And as some of you might know, when you build a custom widget, you don't get that. You're kind of on your own and have to work it out yourself. So that was one really great aspect for the developers, but also just how simple they are to set up. So for this specific one, we have images and text most of the time that have to be edited. But where they display on the site and how they're displayed is always static. It's not something that changes. So this is an actual exhibit detail page. And another reason we knew that the client wouldn't be able to manually create these pages and remember all the widgets is we had to integrate events, and we had a very complex event system for this project. And we didn't want to risk that, you know, just through simple user error, that widget getting changed or removed, or them forgetting, you know, which layout to use to make pictures show up next to the text. So a dynamic module solved this for us really, really well. All we did for it, we created sections, exhibit sections that they start with. So all the exhibits live in a section. Within those sections, they create the exhibit itself. And then as you saw on that detail page, each exhibit has a row with an image and text. So our client just goes in here and adds the content. It's a very simple form, which you'll see with a title, heading, some body copy, and they upload their image. So they never have to go to those pages and update that content. They never have to worry about it. And this means if they hire someone new, this is a position that might get passed around to different people within their company, we know that it's going to be simple no matter who the client user is. So dynamic content modules have been really great for us. And if you're not already utilizing this aspect of Sitefinity, I encourage you to. They do a lot of the heavy lifting, and they allow us to do things with design and with the content that we normally wouldn't, because we'd be worried about the client messing something up, or just about the experience not being maintained. The whole team gets to talk about this ahead of time. As you saw with the form that they enter, we actually architect that ahead of time. We put character limits on things. There's a lot of thought that goes into it, and it's been just overall really great for us. For our end users, as I said, their experience is maintained. As we've designed it, we're able to lay out content in very specific and strategic ways, and that's very easy for our non-technical client user to maintain and update. So that was an example of where we do need a widget, but there are also cases where we don't. And I think a lot of times it's very easy when you encounter a situation where there is a very complex design or very complex content to just go, oh yeah, we'll build a widget for that. They'll get to enter their content in a field, put it on the page, call it a day. And sometimes that is great, but for our situation, it's a little unique. On some of our projects, we don't always have the back-end resources that we would like. And we have to rely more on our front-end team. And most of our front-end designers don't know C#, unfortunately. So building a custom widget for everything isn't an option. So whenever our IA or our content strategists are working on these wireframes and they encounter something where they know there's just no way that, you know, Betty from HR is going to be able to update this table every day and remember all these steps, we're going to need a widget, but we aren't able to build that. We instead use layouts or page templates. I'll show you an example of both, and this is a great way for our front-end developers to be able to help solve the problem, whether it be complex design or complex content, without having to build a ton of custom widgets. So one example here, this is actually several custom layouts on the page. We had this intro sentence here in the center, which was very crucial for the overall strategy of the page. There's a lot of content here, and we wanted to make sure that it would be easy to scan. And this sentence here in particular kind of gives an overview for this page, and we use it across the site on a number of pages. And we were worried, you know, using the WYSIWYG, if our client were to say accidentally enter, you know, H3 instead of an H2 here, which I believe this is a paragraph. But if they were to do that, it might affect how this looks. So it could become several headings, several links. They could basically put whatever they wanted in there. And then it wouldn't be a useful intro for the page. It would just be more content, more bloat. So the way we solved this is we just created a simple custom layout that you drag on the page, and then any content you put in a content widget within that layout is forced to look like this. So we basically just set up the styling so no matter what they put in here, it would always look exactly the way we designed it. Another example here, this is a state fair site. Where we have a lot of custom widgets on this page, a lot of dynamic data. So there's an event system, there's when gates open and close, there was a Instagram widget. So there's really only one thing on this page that the client actually needed to update, and that was this promo you see here in the middle. And we wanted to make sure that they weren't coming to this page to update that and overwhelmed by all of the things they could do. As you know, sometimes the Sitefinity admin can give you a little more rope than you need. So here we actually locked everything down in the page template itself. This is a home page, so it was very easy for us to do that because we knew they wouldn't be building a lot of home pages, just the one. And so we locked down everything else in the page template. So when they go to the page itself and the admin, the only thing they're able to edit is this little promo here. We were able to do this by planning out all of our widgets, layouts, pages ahead of time, like I showed in the wireframe. So when you have all of it in front of you, it's very easy to identify patterns and reusable elements. And so we knew ahead of time, you know, we would have a bunch of these intro sentences, or we would have pages where only one or two things would be edited. And we were able to plan that out in advance so that our developers could easily execute it. And we knew that, you know, things would stay as we designed them. So like I mentioned, through our wireframing process, we're able to talk about different patterns that we know are going to be there, different page types, and kind of make a list so we can predict how rough it's going to be ultimately for our developers, but also for design. This helps a lot with our overall project scope and timeline. We're able to lock down key pieces of information on the page that we don't want the client to be able to edit or accidentally remove, because that can happen. And this just makes things easier for them, and also gives us, some confidence that things are going to still look great months after we've handed off a site. For our end user, this means a lot less content bloat, a lot less stuff on the page, because we've set up clear rules that we know will make it easier for content to be scannable, for them to interact with. And our client is able to maintain those rules because we kept everything so simple. And they're able to use their WYSIWYG and edit the content without having to think about it too much. So one of the easiest things that I think everyone here can take away today and immediately start doing in their projects, this came about from our content strategist, actually. Writes about 90% of the content in the site itself. So as you saw in the wireframing example I showed you, we write real content in our wireframes, but we don't always wireframe every page. If we have a project where we know a lot of the pages are going to be similar, say it's a bank site and you're going to have a page about each type of account that bank offers, we know that it would be a waste of time for us to wireframe every single one of those. So what we'll do is we'll do one of those, we'll annotate it, we'll make sure we all agree on it, and then our content author will build out those pages herself. And can you hear me? Oh, in the admin, and we'll be able to update the content. And sorry, I think we're having some technical difficulties. Sorry about that.
We hear you fine.
Okay, great. They're all good. Sorry about that, guys. So while she was updating these pages, basically she is more tech savvy than most of our clients, and she's awesome. But she had to basically be our client and remember all of the steps to update a page, all of the widgets to use for specific situations. So she's really great for testing these things out for us. And one of the things that was really bothering her is when she was editing a page, there would just be so many options for layouts, for widgets over there in that right toolbox. So we figured out, hey, why don't we, we put all this thought into our widget designers, into the page itself. Why don't we apply that same thought to the Sitefinity admin and customize the page editor toolbox? So this is an example of a site we did early on, and this is what you would expect normally. All the widgets are there, and they're just all there in their little lists. And it's a lot. It's a lot for our clients. It's a lot for us. And half of these are probably never used. And a lot of them certainly aren't used in the page view of the admin. So one of the things we started doing is we started grouping our widgets based on how and when they're used. We started disabling widgets that we knew for a fact the client wouldn't use. So there are a lot of e-commerce widgets that we don't typically get to use. And by disabling them, it means that the client can still enable them if needed, but they don't show up in the toolbox here. So it's just a little less for them to look at. So it's easy for them to grab the widget they need quickly and put it on the page and not really have to think about it. We also order these based on how often they might be used. So here, we have all of our content widgets grouped. We have a specific instance in this situation where there are a lot of document widgets. So we made a group for those, one for cafe menus. And this just makes it a lot easier for them to find what they need. And it's not as overwhelming for our client. We do the same thing with our layouts. As I mentioned, we do a lot of custom layouts. This solves a lot of problems for us, but it also means that our client has to remember when to use a layout and has to look through a list and find that one. So to make it easier for them, we talk ahead of time with our client and as a team, and we've established naming conventions that work for everyone so that everyone knows, okay, the global footer, that's the footer that's used on every page. If it has HP in front of it, it's for the home page. So these are things we talk about ahead of time, and then we just organize them based on, how often they're used, when they're used. Oftentimes, we also will disable widgets that are only used on page templates and not the pages themselves That way, when you're in the page template editor, you'll see, like, say, global navigation widgets there, and not on the page view where they're not as commonly used. So this is something that's just, I kind of like want to hit myself for not doing this sooner, because it's such a simple thing. We do it at the end of every project before we hand things off to the client, and we've seen a lot of success as a result. Naming conventions are really important for developers, but now they've become really important for our whole team to discuss ahead of time and figure out, and just making sure that we're not giving the client everything that comes out of the box and whittling it down to just what they need so it's not as overwhelming. For the end user, same thing we keep coming back to. The experience that we've designed is retained, and we know that it's going to be there, months, years after we've handed over a site, and maybe we aren't, maintaining that site for them. For the client user, they don't have to think about things as much. You want to limit what they have to think about when it regards to maintaining the site, so that they can focus on the actual content on the site. So this has just been really helpful for both. So I've talked a lot about our specific team, and we're very lucky here at TrueMatter because we have so many great resources with a content strategist, an IA, a designer, several different developers, but not everybody has that in their company. If you do, if you're that lucky like us, we encourage you to collaborate at the beginning, in the middle, at the end, the whole time, and communicate, and not silo yourself within your discipline, and to push these processes we've discussed forward within your company, and try some of them out. If you don't have all of those disciplines, let's say you have a designer and a developer, there is still a lot that you can do together to collaborate. I can't tell you how valuable it can be for a designer to have a front-end developer review their work before they start development. It really, really helps cut down on budget bloat, and also just surprises, as we mentioned, that come up later towards the end of a project. So you can still use all of these practices and hopefully eventually get to expand your team. If you don't have any of these disciplines, let's say you're just a team of developers, there's still lots of things you can do. And we've talked about a few very simple ones that, you don't have a content strategist, you can still limit the amount of content on the page, and make sure that it's easy to edit that content. So, but we do encourage you to seek the right teammates, encourage your organization. It can be really great to have all of these people on hand. So that's it, guys. Active collaboration equals better UX. Thanks for hanging in there with us. I think we are going to answer some questions.
Hello, this is Chuck. I'm back here and gonna solicit questions. As a reminder, any questions you may have, please submit it in the question interface there to the right of your panel. And we did have a couple questions that came in, and as we wait for any additional ones, let's jump right into the couple that have come in. You may have answered this, but I was trying to follow along, but somebody had asked the question, what is the wireframe tool?
I can answer that one. This is Dean again. We're actually using a tool called Axure. That's A-X-U-R-E. It's a tool that allows us to publish to HTML. It allows us to have lots of space on the screen for all of the annotations you saw. There's lots of great tools that do this sort of stuff. We've centered on Axure. We've used several others in the past. Becca mentioned Balsamiq or InVision. There's lots of them out there, especially now. Axure for us.
Excellent. And then what made you use Feather?
Well, we actually, like I said before, we have more front-end resources than back-end, and we were using Foundation. So I know I personally was more comfortable using Razor, which is our preferred syntax, over web forms. And it was very easy to integrate Feather, our Foundation with Feather. There was actually, not anymore, I don't think it's supported anymore, but there was a Feather Foundation project that we were using, and now we maintain our own custom version. But yeah, we really like it. It's very easy for our front-end guys to edit and customize widgets without needing a backend developer every time.
Excellent. And then this This one, do you plan to share, or I guess they're asking, can you share the widgets you did? I don't know I don't know if they, yeah, if they want those, like posted somewhere, or maybe you have them contact you. You get your contact information right here.
Yeah, of course. We're always happy to share that kind of thing and just kind of explain how it works. I will say a lot of our widgets are only useful if you're using Feather, since it is built around that. But yeah, of course.
You could also reach us at ideas@truematter.com. That's an email address, and if you're more comfortable with email, we obviously have our Twitter feed here.
Yeah, because the person that asked that question went on to also add that the ones that are replacing the HTML are just great. So a little bit of a side comment there. The last question I've got here while we're waiting for if any others trickle in, what do collaboration sessions look like?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, I think, as Becca mentioned, the first thing you have to focus on when you want to collaborate is just the choice to do it. And once you've made the choice, the idea is to meet together early and often. It's not enough for the team to come together at like a kickoff session, for instance, and then be able to know how to do something from that point on. And that's actually a very common occurrence, despite what people say about agile processes. We actually meet, discuss, and talk all the time. So a lot of it is actually quite informal. We have constant conversations going on, but we also do sort of similar to agile method where we have stand-ups, but we also simply get together and say, now is the time where we're going to review design, or we're going to review information architecture. Everyone comes in and everyone has something to say. You can't leave that session without saying something, because if you don't, we assume you are 100% okay with what you're seeing. And that alone motivates people to contribute, particularly people who are going to be on the hook for this stuff later. So we want lots of participation in these sessions, which are informally held. I hope that's a good answer for you. It's just some session could be official, but so long or less informal. As long as everyone's really talking, we're in good shape.
And to go along with that, when he says less formal, sometimes it's even just talking on Slack. We use that internally, and it's been a really great tool. Just sharing screenshots of what we're working on in a group channel is a really good, quick way where everyone can say yay or nay to this or that without having to get up and walk across the room and have a physical discussion, which we are lucky. We all have, it's an open office, so I can yell at the IA from my desk when I need to. But yeah, just talking all day, every day is really helpful.
Terrific, thank you. And there are no more questions, and I want to thank Becca and Dean for taking time today to take us through this terrific webinar. As a reminder to the rest of you, the attendees, that this has been recorded, and I will be sending out a formal invitation or a formal follow-up email with the recording link within the next couple days. So look for that, and please feel free to share it with your colleagues or anybody else that may be interested in the topic. With that, I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar, and again, thank you very much.